welcome Akhilesh V for this podcast. This podcast is based on self-driving car and the technology involved in it. And Akhilesh is an deep learning engineer at Flux Auto, a proud brother of mine whom I found in my college, and probably the best experiences that I had working in the community. And it gives me an immense pleasure to welcome him for this podcast. And I welcome Akhilesh Bhai for this podcast.
Thank you, Vishwas. Thanks
Yeah,
for the introduction.
yeah. Let's just start with the questions, bro.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Now I just wanted to ask you this one thing. You're working on self-driving autonomy. So now it's
Yes.
involved with such an humongous machine. I just want you to give me and brief insights on how this computer interaction and living entities being in an consolidated environment, and want you to give your views on are living entities and computer interaction just a simulation?
Okay. So basically in this field, that is in the self-driving field, so if you take, so simulation, the interaction, the question whichever you asked, like the interaction between the human being and a computer is actually a simulation. Okay, simulation is the first step of what is going to be done actually in the real world, because what happens is, like, at least in this field, in the self-driving field, so you can't just directly go on test a model or a self-driving package directly on the road. So what you have to do is you have to first simulate it. So you have to see whether all the like the model or the car behaves in the expected way in all the cases. But there might be lot of edge cases. So we need to make sure that these edge cases are solved, and the car or truck, whichever vehicle in which the autonomy is being induced. So we need to make sure that even at those edge cases, so the car or the vehicle has to move smoothly, okay, with whatever level of autonomy is being induced. For that, we need to know what are edge cases that might occur. So for this purpose, the first step always before testing a vehicle on the road is your simulation. So what we do here is we encounter different types of edge cases. So we'll see how the model actually behaves in such type of cases. So then we incur what happens over there. So based on that, we make some improvements continuously. So and then once the simulation is done, only then we go for the real world testing. So always I could say that in this field, the simulation is always the first step. Only then we can go for the next step. So simulation is very, very important, and it's the first basic step, at least in this field. So
When
yes,
you
it
told
is.
about the simulation, I can get to know how hard is an autonomy, but how hard
Yes,
is it to build an autonomous system in this field?
it is. It is a little hard because, like, if you see, like, there are different levels of autonomy. You have level one, level two, level three, level four, level five. Okay, so level five is the ultimate level of autonomy, which none of the companies has achieved till now. Okay, but it is possible in the coming years. But as of now, none of the companies have achieved level five. Even Google and all have achieved only till level four. Okay, so you have different levels of autonomy. Now, say like level one, so you need most of your human interaction. Okay, just little bit of autonomy will be there. Okay, like your level two, so you can say, for example, lane keeping. So you can just make your vehicle follow that particular lane. Okay, the level two of autonomy. Fine. So lane changes. So all these things comes under level two. So still you need the human interaction in this. You need the human or the driver to monitor it. So level two itself is like this. So now if you go on to level three and level four is like almost near to full autonomy. It's not completely full, but it's still almost closer to full autonomy. So now that time you should, your driver, whoever is there, he shouldn't be interfering in the like in the driving. Okay, so he shouldn't be interfering in it. The machine has to take care everything by itself, whatever encounters. But for that, the machine has to be as robust as possible. It has to have a log of all the cases that is going to occur. So in case if something occurs, it should have an adaptive solution. It should have an alternate solution to maneuver such cases. So that is why level 4 or level 5 is still a very hard uh, a thing to get in. It's not so easy to get in, but it takes time. It's not like it's not gettable also, but it takes time. That's all. But it's really hard. So as I already said, level 5 autonomy is still not being achieved because there are cases where the model will fail, obviously. Because as a human driver, you can say that in some cases, when you are driving, you can only imagine that you make so many mistakes, right? Even now, even a professional driver can still make mistakes and accidents do happen, correct? Now, how can we expect a machine to run like in fully autonomous mode without any interaction of the driver? That can be possible, but it takes a lot of time. It's very, very hard.
Yeah, when you told about robust systems, there is lot of induced potential in the computer architecture today. I just want
Yes,
you
correct.
to I just want you to give that view of what was computer architecture before and what is it, that robustness that we are seeing today in terms of self-driving autonomy as an hardware being involved in such kind of systems. What is that all about?
Okay. So as you said, like no, let's say like let's go back 20 years. Okay. So 20 years ago, what was the architecture of a system? So you had some MBs of RAM, right? And your processing speed was like some megahertz, correct? So with that kind of an this one, so with that kind of an infrastructure, do you think self-driving is really possible? No. So you need a lot of processing power because what happens is like the data that you are going to analyze during your driving is immense. So you have multiple sensors mounted on your vehicle. So each sensor can give you out data that can be like so immense. It can be so compute intensive. So like so many sensors compete together. So you get so many inputs. Your processing speed should be so high that these MBs and KBs of RAM will not even matter at all. A single image from a camera can like occupy more than MBs, right? If you have a proper quality of camera, a single image from camera can occupy more than MBs. If you have only MBs of RAM, and how do you like load multiple images, multiple sensors, the bin files that is being produced by the LiDAR? So it's not possible, right? So now if you see like back then, just a computing machine. Okay, so when the first computing machine was released, just a computing machine used to occupy almost a room, the size of almost a room. So it used to be like some 6 feet, some like 20 inches and all those stuff. Okay, so that used to be the dimension of the computers back then, 20, 30 years back. But now you carry your mobile phone, which has more compute power than that, and you can just carry it in your pocket, right? So that is the kind of optimization that the hardware industry has taken, has moved in, like with the with the proceeding time. So what happens is like by optimization, what I mean is, so optimization in your hardware, it actually depends on three factors. Okay, so three main factors which will influence your optimization is power consumption, your speed of computation, and area. So these three factors. Now, when you say optimization, how do these factors influences? Now consider area. Area, if you see, when there is an improvement in the hardware, your area is supposed to decrease. The area occupied by the hardware is supposed to decrease. Correct? Now look at the processors that were there, that was there in the early 2000s or something. Okay, the amount of size that was having. Now look at a chip. Now at this present age, look at a chip which is there in your mobile. Correct? So it has more processing speed and the area has reduced a lot, right? So a processor can fit into a mobile's dimension. It's just like some 5 to 6 inches. That's all. Correct. But that time the processing unit used to be some 20 inches and all. So you can make out the difference, right? The area has reduced a lot considering the like with the advent of moving time. So the area has been reduced. So that is how optimization in terms of area will be done. So area has to be decreased with the improvement in the architecture. So that is about area. So next we go to speed. So your computation power, your computation accuracy, your computation fastness has to be more. Okay, so it has to be, now say like your processor, as I said, so that time, how much it used to have, you take your mobile. So that time what, the first mobile which was given, so it had some megahertz of processing, right? Megahertz, the processing speed can be like some 1 megahertz or 2 megahertz max to max. Correct, only those millicycles used to run per second. But now we have gigahertz of processing speed, correct? Your CPU clocking speed is around some 2 to 3 gigahertz, right? So it used to be so fast. Now look at now gigahertz is here and megahertz. It's like 1,000 times improvement that you have got in this time. So that means your speed has increased, correct? Then your power consumption has to be reduced. Okay, so it should not consume much power. With less power consumption, it has to give you the optimum results, it has to be fast, and it has to occupy less area. So if you consider these three factors, and this is where your optimization will be driven into, and your hardware will get much better. So this optimization is what every hardware industry would look into. So these three factors are the main ones which will influence your hardware optimization. So that is how the improvements have come since then. So you can imagine, right? Like you see how fast your mobile is now, correct? With the advent of your internet and all. So do you think like we could use internet at that point of time with this speed? Not possible, right? So the data processing power has increased a lot compared to that period to the present age.
Yeah, when you told about the examples of how the mobile, the edge computing these days,
Yes,
living
yes,
all that, when we see the risks in self-driving car, and there are some setbacks which this industry has seen till today. There has
yes,
been accidents which have been accepted as okay,
yeah,
it's just a system flaw or something. But today,
yes,
when you look at all these risks, it was probably less menial compared to what an human error could have been. But now,
yes.
people have really underestimated the power of deep learning in this field because they feel it's an moronic thought to induce sensors and make decisions. What's your view on this statement of underestimating the power of deep learning in this field?
Okay. So underestimating deep learning. So actually, I would say yes, it has happened, because what happens is, like, now say your deep learning networks, now they are capable of performing now most of your perception systems. Now if you take Tesla and all, the perception system, their perception system in their self-driving car involves camera, correct? So now in that camera, now say if you are on the road, you need to understand, if you take whatever you're doing on the road as an image, you need to understand what is happening on the road, correct? So now you need to understand which object is there in front of you. So how could you overcome it? So how is the object moving, like whether it's moving in our direction or it's moving in the opposite direction. So how is the motion, whether it is actually static or whether it is moving or it's static at that same place. So these things you need to analyze, correct? So for this part, analysis part, for this perception system, deep learning is the one, at least for the camera sensor, deep learning is the one which will help you a lot, because using deep learning networks, you can do object detection, you can do segmentation where each pixel of an image can be mapped to whatever information we want. So that is what segmentation is. You can do object detection. Object detection meaning you can just get the coordinates of that particular object which is there, which is present in that particular image, right? So once you get those information, once you get those parameters, you will be able to understand where exactly the object is, how it is. You can do lane segmentation, you can do motion estimation, right? You can use optical flow, use motion estimation. This motion estimation will be very useful to judge whether a particular object which is there in front of you is static or is it moving. Okay, so then you'll be able to take decisions based on that. Now, if it is moving, if it's little slow, so we can't keep following that particular object, right? We need to maneuver through that object. We need to overtake that object, correct? So we need to analyze the distance between your ego vehicle and that particular object, because you can't just go close to it and then take a like overtake and then overtake it, correct? So you need to maintain some minimal distance. So that distance estimation, so all these stuff are there, are a lot of stuff which has to be analyzed, and deep learning has shown very good results in this. Now if you see Tesla, their Tesla stack is comprised with only full of deep learning. Okay, they use only cameras. They are using multiple cameras. They fuse it together. They use only deep learning. Deep learning, deep learning, deep learning. Only with deep learning, they did not use LiDAR. Now, if you see, if you use LiDARs, deep learning, like you can use deep learning for LiDARs, but that's not required actually. Now, if you see Waymo, okay, Google's Waymo, they use LiDARs. Okay, so they used to do this, they started working on this autonomous technology back some time. We did not have this deep learning much in boom, but still they were able to do it. They were able to get level 4 autonomy. Okay, that is also an approach. But when it comes to camera, So you need some powerful computation that will be able to analyze the data that is being given from the sensor. So for that, yes, deep learning is really, really awesome. Deep learning is the one which will, at least for the camera sensor, deep learning is the one which will take you further. So yes, deep learning actually has been underestimated, because now if you see like few tasks like object detection, segmentation, whatever I said, so for these tasks, deep learning can be used. Okay, for motion estimation, you can use LSTMs, correct? So motion estimation, what is motion estimation? Now say if you go, if you take a, if the car is moving, okay, so you need to know where to where it is. Now, if you want to know that if it is moving, so that means you need to, there should be a change of that object with respect to time, correct? So if the object is moving, means its position is changing with respect to time. So this temporal features, now say if you're analyzing different frames of different time steps, so to analyze that change, you need to understand the features, how it has been changed in those time frames, with the preceding time frames, how the features of the particular object is changed. So for that, you need a powerful deep learning method, so for which you can use this long short-term memory unit. So that is a type of deep learning method, deep learning neural network. So that can be used to analyze whether it's in motion or not, because it will be able to understand the features. So the features which depend on time is actually called as temporal features. So these temporal features can be very well understood by LSTMs. So deep learning is such powerful. Now, if you say for behavior, you know, we have something called trajectory prediction. So for a self-driving car, we need this trajectory prediction, because when we are going in a particular path, if we get a obstruction in that path, so we need to make decisions, we need to predict our trajectory, so such that our ego vehicle maneuvers through that obstacle. Okay, so for such steps, you can use reinforcement learning, right? The action, what is the state of the object and what is the action that is going to take. So based on it, there will be a reward assigned. So these things are really, really awesome. So still there is a lot to explore in this. So that is what many industries and many people have been researching about. There are constant developments. So recently Tesla also changed their way of implementing deep learning. Like initially they used to they used to use a single network for multiple tasks. Okay, so now they have changed their methodology. They use this like fusion. They use this sensor fusion technique to predict analysis. So these are some of the improvements that is being constantly going in this field. And yes, deep learning will be very, very useful, and it will be like exploited more in the years to come, in the time to come.
Yeah, I know. When you told about how deep learning systems are more robust these days, it is fine because to one extent they have given lot and lot of benchmarks in different fields like medical imaging, precision medicine, and all. But now data centers were being used in self-driving car because there was a latency issues and there is nothing called as 5G which is not involved now in the research. They have removed the concept of it, but now when you take into the consideration about the errors which can happen, it's very critical when it comes to a self-driving car. If there is a fraction of error which is being induced, anything like generative adversarial attacks or something else,
Yes.
it can be okay, it can be said no, it's fine in a medical system because it is getting a data stream of sequential data which can be analyzed by humans also. But all of a sudden, if something goes wrong in a self-driving car, it can't be analyzed. So now, when it comes to generative adversarial attacks and all these, right, it can be okay to one extent. It can be tolerated in a medical system, but not in a self-driving car. But I want to ask your view on data centers involved in all the fields, including medicine, AI, and everything called as big data. What's your view on these kind of applications where data centers are required? And what are these built for at the end of the day? That's what I really wanted to ask you.
Okay. So now see, as you mentioned, this medical field, this data centers and all these places, okay, so they use AI, correct? So, but we need to make sure that we are not completely dependent on AI, because the point which you mentioned about this generative adversarial attacks, so that is a really valuable point. That's a really valuable point. Why I am saying this is, now what do they do in the generative adversarial attacks? Just a small pinch of noise, okay? Just a small pinch of noise can disrupt your entire deep learning model working. You get it? So deep learning model are proving to be robust, but not up to the level that we are expecting. Because as you said, this generative adversarial attack, what happens? How do they attack us? They just make a small change. A small change in 2 or 3 pixel values is more than enough to just disrupt your deep learning models, the working itself. Just a small pinch of noise, it could just mispredict whatever is there. It can just misclassify whatever is there. Now, suppose say if it is used in the medical field, if you're going to like segment brain tumor, correct? So now if there's a adversarial attack over there, if there's a small thing changed, and if the deep learning model predicts false, like there are false positives, false negatives, correct? Now if it says like if there's a person, okay, who's actually having brain tumor, but because of this attack, your model predicts that he's not having brain tumor. So imagine his situation, what happens? Correct? So this
To one
adversarial
extent, it
attack
can be
actually
tolerated
affects.
because doctors are involved. They can at least test it. But in a self-driving car,
Yes.
it can never.
No, that's what I'm saying. So you can't completely depend on AI for this. You need some human supervising in that. Because without human supervising, if you're completely dependent on AI, that is gone. Because you can say even if a proper robust AI system is built, it wouldn't be 100% accurate. Correct? None of the systems in the world is 100% accurate. That implies to AI also. So AI systems, even if they are robust like anything, but still they can make errors. Okay, maybe those errors are minute and it can be negligible, but not with the attacks, not with the adversarial attacks which we said. So these adversarial attacks mostly they happen during the self-driving technology. So what you said. So actually that part has to be taken care. Now there are several methods that can be used to counter this adversarial attacks. So there are several methods, like even your architectural properties, like say when you're building a deep learning model, a skip connection can matter much a lot. Okay, in extracting your features, so that can be like this architectural properties itself can say that can mean a lot in attacking in overcoming your generative adversarial attacks. Okay, so now say if there's if using adversarial attack, now say if your self-driving cars, what happens is even if there is a small change in the angle of the camera or the lightness of the image, okay, the brightness of the image, if the lighting conditions vary, your deep learning model's network would vary. Correct? If you want to, that will actually vary. But if you want your deep learning model to be robust to these, your data should be so good. Your data should be so robust first, because the better data you provide to your model, the better output you get from it. Correct? So if your data is robust, if your data includes so many lighting conditions, if your data includes so many angles, different views, perspective views, then all these together being fed to the model, and the model learns all this, then your model will be robust. But still not in the case of self-driving technology when there is an adversarial attack. Okay. So if there's a small change in the pixel value, now see, most of the times cameras images are RGB images, correct? Now if there is a, now model would have learned a particular pattern from these RGB values of each pixel. Now if there is a small change in this, okay, with this adversarial attack, if even if there is a small noise that is being added to the image, so it will misclassify anything. It will just say that the car is actually moving. Now say if there's a car in front of you, it's static at that point. But due to this attack, if it is like, if the model mispredicts that it's moving, so what it will do, your car will continuously keep on moving, right? But what is your ego vehicle supposed to do? Since the object in front of you is static, it needs to stop there, but it won't stop because of the misprediction. It will just keep on moving and it will crash into that object. Correct? So these threats are still there. Still now this part, the how to overcome this adversarial attack is the current research that is being going on, so that deep learning models can be made as robust as possible to avoid such threats. But still, such adversarial attacks poses a threat to deep learning models.
There is some speculation of level 2 autonomy can be built by an open source project today.
Okay.
Level 2 autonomy has always been there in since they had this desire of building the self-driving car and an autonomous system. You know,
Yes.
of course, we have not reached to a stage where we can go fully autonomous or we can completely rely on a machine. But I just want to ask you this one question: what's the breakthrough that this industry is waiting in order to get a fully autonomous system to the hands of the people? What's the breakthrough that is really required in order to give an autonomous system? It can be hardware, it can be software, or else in terms of what can be the changes of an hardware architecture required. What's your view on this trend which is actually going on? Waymo is coming out with its own hardware, FSD computers from the Tesla, lot and lot of things. What's the breakthrough that we are waiting for?
Okay. So now say that a professional driver, now a professional driver, a human professional driver, so when he is driving, okay, so he would have seen, he would have had many years of experience, okay. But now suddenly if there is some case which he is unable to handle, so what will he do? So he'll try to somehow manage it, correct? But that kind of a thinking is not possible with AI. Okay, so if you see that kind of a human level thinking, at least with this current progress in AI, it is not possible. Okay, so that is why I said that fully autonomous technology is not possible with the current progress that is happening. Okay, because as I already said, we as a human being are making so many mistakes when we are driving, even if we have so much of experience. Okay, so what we can do to improve is your deployment when the car is being deployed, it has to continuously keep on like capturing data. It has to continuously like now say if you have deployed your first self-driving car, so it doesn't mean that you are done there itself. What you have to do is you have to make sure that that particular vehicle runs through different cases, collect data from there. Maybe there will be a failure obviously the first time. So collect data from there and make sure, just we need to analyze where that particular error has occurred. So where the vehicle has failed, where the machine has failed. So such data we need to analyze, and we need to make sure that the next time when the model or the vehicle is going into production, so these errors are being avoided. So these are the continuous improvements that you can make. So at least in self-driving technology, you can't fix a particular approach and say that this approach will work better. Okay, so there will be something or the other glitch that might come up. So what you have to do is you have to keep on running. Now even now say now, as you said, Tesla have their own hardware. Okay, so what they do is now almost like more than some hundreds and thousands of vehicles still have autopilot in other countries. Okay, so what they do is Tesla, just because they have this autopilot system, they don't stop there. What they do, when the models are running with that autopilot mode, they start collecting data. So they start collecting data wherever this autopilot mode is used. So this data will be analyzed by Tesla, the engineers at Tesla, and they'll make sure what the model, they'll analyze what decisions the model has taken, the car has taken in that autopilot mode in that particular situation. So they'll analyze it and they'll make some improvements, and they'll keep on giving some updates to the autopilot feature. Okay, so that is how you can improve self-driving. So you can't just go at one stretch. You can't like at one single stretch. You can't go to this fully autonomous level. That is not even possible. So you have to make frequent improvements, regular updates, regular intervals of improvements is what will keep on updating your system, your vehicle. And yes, as I said, like fully autonomous driving is still a question. So still, even the industry experts are not sure whether it will be whether we'll be able to go to the fully autonomous, the level 5 of the fully autonomous this one technology. But yeah, people are trying for that. The researches are still going on. They are making sure how like the improvements. They are making sure that whatever they could do possible, they are trying to do it. So yes, if level 4 is possible, then yeah, so we can make some improvements, and then we'll just proceed with the level 5 also. Like what actually, if you see the technology is, we have that kind of technology for fully autonomous. Just that we need some more internet improvements, as you said. So 5G technology would be a very good add-on if we are going for the level 5 autonomy, because the data that is being added to the cloud, the data, the decisions that is being taken, it has to be real time. It has to be synchronized real time. Because if even a small latency, the prediction, the data, the decision, if you have a latency, okay, so you're making the decision for some frame which has already moved some 2 3 frames ahead, right? So such latency should not be there. That synchronization is very important. So for that, we still need a lot of improvements, and yes, industry is still working on that.
When you told about insights on data, let's just go for a little bit of academic nonsense that we actually go through when we are learning deep learning or machine learning. I just want to ask you, what is statistics according to you? No, there is statistical model which is involved in sensor fusion, data sparsity, and all these, right? What is statistics according to you?
Okay, statistics is like you're just tabulating your data, you can say. So you're just tabulating your data so that you will be able to better analyze what has happened till now and make decisions on that. So usually, why do we use statistics? We what we do is like we like take out the data. Okay, so we arrange it in the format that we want. So we analyze the data. Why do we analyze the data? Because we need to know what has happened till now and how to what are improvement that is being required. Now we have various measures. Now we have this variance, the standard deviation, all this stuff. Okay, so what do these actually do? Now, standard deviation actually says how much your model, how much your prediction has actually deviated from what it is supposed to be. Correct? So for these kind of analysis, you need statistics of data. You need that part where you will see, you will be able to view what has happened till now and what has to be done further. So for that, the data has to be in a proper format. So only then we'll be able to understand it. So that is what statistics mainly does. It just tabulates the data, whatever data was there till now, it just tabulate it and it will present it to you in a format that you can understand and make decisions so that you can make some improvements that is required. So based on whatever was there in the previous time that were where the data was collected, so you will be able to analyze it better and you will be able to make a decision better. Okay, so basically what I feel is after all this, statistics is just like presentation of data. It's just a presentation of data that we are going to analyze in the further steps. So yeah, it's just a presentation of data, I feel.
No, when you told about presentation of data, it was fine, but there is something called a probability involved in every deep learning model.
Okay.
You know, there
Yes.
are ways in which true positive, false positive, everything, whether you take matrices, everything comes into the picture at the end of the day. But now, when I think of probability to such an extent, and I think of prediction of fatalities with
Okay.
the number crunch data, what do you feel about this can be an influence in the prediction of fatality in the future and such an autonomous system? And also, what do you feel about hardware which is being involved in all these computation? Let it be GPU, which has been involved for a long time now. What do you feel about these technologies and the math behind it?
Okay. So what really happens is like finally now say your whatever I said like this motion estimation, so the segmentation, whatever I said, okay, for lane keeping now say if you are doing lane keeping, you need to segment the lanes on the road, correct? So these lane segmentations, your motion estimation, whatever I said, so these are your tracking, okay. So these are what basically your deep learning model conveys is the probability of that particular object being a lane. Now say if it's a lane segmentation, now if you say that now a road is, so in that particular road, in that particular section of that road, okay, so how is the deep learning model able to understand that this is lane and this is not lane? Correct. Now you have your road there, it will be able to understand lane. Okay, it should be able to differentiate between what is a lane and what is not a lane. Okay, so that is where it uses the concept called probability. It basically, if it segments a lane on road, it means that it has it's what the deep learning model conveys to us by segmenting that lane is it is now say if it has segmented that lane with zero point 0.9 or 0.95 confidence, which says that the deep learning model is 95% sure that that particular region is lane. Okay, 95% of the like 95% of the times that is what is being actually being predicted as lanes. So that actually goes behind probability itself. Okay, so now you see this probability. Now, if you say classification, now if you take image classification, what is image classification? You're going to just classify what that particular image is. Okay, maybe a yes or no. Okay, or maybe some like different, some 10 to 20 classes, 36 classes. You can classify which alphabet it is if you take this MNIST and all. So you'll be able to see which character it is classifying. So classify basically means you are giving a label to that particular image, correct? That label is assigned based on the probability. Okay, so now say if that particular, now say if while I'm driving, okay, I've detected an object. and that object it is being said as car. Okay, deep learning model says that particular object is car. It would have some particular confidence for that particular object. Okay, it would say that okay, if I point with zero point 0.9 confidence, it has detected that particular object as car. Now, what that means is that any object with that features, okay, with that similar kind of features, will be 90% percentage of the times any object with that particular features will be the class will belong to class car. Correct? So the remaining 10% is nothing but the error or the like misprediction in the features, that the deep learning model will make. Okay. So it says that the confidence 0.9 means that 90% that it is a car. Okay. It is a car with 90% probability, right? So that is what probability means. How likely or how probable is your particular object being detected or classified based on what the model has given. So that is where probability will come into picture. Probability will play a very important role, because now, as I already said, now this lane segmentation is one example where it says that probably the lane is present in that particular region of that road. Correct? If the probability is high, then yes, the decision making will be much better for us. Correct? So probability is very important, at least when involved with machine learning or deep learning field.
Yeah, no, when we also think of something called as fatalities, yes, probability will come into the picture. But now,
Yes.
when I think of these models are just being run on an interpreter or a compiler,
Yeah.
one way or the other. It's just the software which is doing the number crunching. What do you feel
Okay.
about the compilers and the interpreter these days? And are these just optimized to just be in the deep learning, or else are we just fitting in that purpose of getting the models with the same architecture, or else are we improving according to the needs? What's the thing which is going behind the software trend in this autonomy?
Okay. So actually, if you see, yes, there is an improvement, because now say now there's a deep learning framework called DLib. Okay. So now this DLib needs the support from Microsoft Visual C++ compiler. Okay, Visual Code C++ compiler. Now with this C++ compiler, DLib, this compiler is required. Why? Because it has to uh, compile the packages, the C++ compile the packages or the codes which are being which are being already induced in the DLib framework. Okay, so now that means this compiler is able to give its compatibility to deep learning. Correct. So there is a lot of improvement. Like 10 years back, if you see this Turbo C++, okay, so Turbo C++ will never help you in such cases. Correct. So it's just a normal compiler. It will never help you in such cases. Now there's an improvement. Now this Visual C++ is from Microsoft. Correct. This distribution is from Microsoft. So this DLib framework, now as I said, DLib framework, deep learning framework requires this C++ for computation. Fine. So actually the compilers are being improving, because software is basically like, now improvements in software, if you see, it's like adding features to it. Okay, so we need to make sure that the improvement to the software package, whatever is being given, so it has to be compatible with the previous versions, plus there has to be some add-on features. Okay, so that is how improvements in software will be seen. Now even in compilers, if you see the same Turbo C++, it was improved a little bit to GCC. Okay, so GCC is one of the C++ compilers. It was a little bit fast compared to Turbo C++. Now that improvement you have in your Microsoft C++. It will be able to run your normal codes, as well as it can support deep learning also. Correct? It will be compatible with the previous versions also. So that is how improvements in the software will be seen. Okay, so it has to comply. It has to be compatible with the previous distributions, as well as there has to be new features that will be keep on adding to the package. So that is how you will like build a software package like with improvement. That improvements means that is what is your add-on features that will be like continuing. So yes, like software packages, if you see these features, these add-on features is what they say, they call it as improvements. So yeah.
Yeah, no, when you told, because we have done an webinar previously, I think 2020 during the pandemic, yeah, we actually did it. You know,
Yes.
when you actually told about solving problems, like, and you also told about how you actually face the technical constraints when you were actually solving the problems in the real world after joining the industry. No, I just want you to give that insight once again. What were those technical constraints which you faced during your first job, or the first deep learning task which you were given, and everything about it? It will give a lot of insights to the people who wants to get inside industry in the future.
Okay. Okay, that's a very critical question. Okay, so yeah, like initially when I used to like work on deep learning projects, so like you see, without the help of internet, you will not be able to code a particular solution or write a program for some particular solution. Okay, so internet help has to be there because programmers mostly they depend on various discussion forums like Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange. Okay, so all these forums are there. Okay, so what happens is like with internet. So what happened is now you know this keyword optimization search, right? Which is there in Google. So initially, what problems I used to face is I used to give out wrong, like the my requirement would be something, but when I used to search, the results would be something else. Okay, so that was the case before. Like the keyword that I had to put in to get my expected researches, I was lacking in that part. Okay, so I was not giving the proper keyword that was required. But when I like continued to work in this particular field, when I kept on doing a lot of researches, so that time I understood how important a keyword is in getting whatever expected results whatever results you are expecting. Okay, so that is one of the very major improvement that I found in myself. That is, I've learned to put in the keywords that I need so that I get my requirement, whatever is there. So that is one thing. And then analyzing the problem statement. So whatever problem statement was given to me, so what is the end goal of that particular problem statement? So that is what is very important because only when you understand what is the end goal of the problem statement, you will be able to give out the requirements for that particular to achieve that end goal. Correct? So you need to first understand what is the end goal of that statement. Only then you'll be able to get what are all the requirements that is needed to achieve this goal, and you will work on satisfying those requirements. Correct? So you need to understand the end goal of the problem statement. So that is one thing which has found a betterment in the with the lot of researches that I've made. So yeah, like now compared to whatever I was there like some 1 year back when I did my first project in deep learning, and what I am now, gain some 10% of skills that is actually required to swim in the ocean of deep learning or computer vision or whatever. Okay, so yeah, like that was initially I used to face that issues, but now okay, fine. With the improved way of thinking, with the improved way of keyword search, yes, I was able to like get my expected results as soon as possible, and I was able to like finish all my work and tasks within the stipulated time.
Yeah, when people come off with experience of solving problems, there are problems faced in different ways. The same
Yes.
set of problem statement, whether it can be in computer vision, deep learning, AI, anything. Problem statement can be faced in plenty, but every problem statement differs. They have their own unique solution, which is and requirement at the time. You know, I just want to ask you this one question: is just experience of solving problems good enough to just give an optimal solution one day in this world of autonomous driving? Because there is a lot of improvement going on, and how to keep an eye on all these improvement and also give an optimal solution. Is it an experience, or else is it just that one essence of being a proper engineer who puts the presence of mind? What is that which takes in order to give that optimal solution?
Okay, so coming to this question, I would say definitely not, because just your problem solving capability will not be able to solve a self-driving problem set, correct? So why? Because it's like sometimes you wouldn't even know you have good experience in solving a problem, but that problem solving capability is just the outline of what you're going to do. It's just an outline of the approach that you're going to take to solve that particular statement. but it is not the complete solution. When you get into the complete solution, you will understand what are all the technicalities that we'll have to go through, what are all the problems that we'll have to go through. Okay, so now say in this self-driving technology, at least with the camera sensor, if you see, now say training deep learning models, deep learning networks are very crucial. Okay, sometimes you wouldn't even understand why the network has failed. You would have expected something, you would have done everything correctly, you would have expected some result from the network, but it has given you some wrong result. You wouldn't even know why it has failed. So you need time to understand that, you need to completely analyze that. So if you analyze, if you are, now say, I'll just give you an example. Now if I have a good problem solving capability, what I'll do is, for any application with respect to which needs timestamps. Okay, so which needs timestamps, different time frames, timestamps of frames needed to be analyzed. So I would directly say, okay, fine, yes, we can use this LSTMs over there, correct? So you can use LSTMs at that point of time. Yes, good. That is a problem solving capability, which is just an outline of the solution. But when you get into the solution, you need to know how to train a LSTM, how we are going to feed data to the LSTM, how are you going to process that time frame, because data pre-processing is very important. How are you going to process that time frames, the time stamps? How are you going to feed it to the network? How are you going to post process the output from the network? So all these things are very important. So you wouldn't even know why this LSTM has actually failed in giving out an output. Okay, so you would have expected something, but it didn't it didn't give that output, right? So that is, this is what training the this is what actually a very like technical part in training your neural network. Because what happens is, like sometimes, now say I have designed a network, okay, I expect it to predict that there is a lane over there, but it has not predicted that lane. Okay, so why? There might be several reasons. Okay, so I would expect the loss. Now say when you're training your network, your losses are supposed to, your cost function, the objective function is supposed to be minimized. Now I would expect the loss to like continuously decrease, but it hasn't decreased. I don't know why. I have implemented all the techniques that is supposed to decrease the loss, but the loss hasn't decreased. There will be small glitch or something or other that I would have missed. Correct? So that comes with experience in working. So just a problem solving capability. Problem solving ability is what industries look for in candidates, but that is just an outline. When you know the outline, it's just a simple theory. When you know the outline, when you know the outline of the approach, you'll be able to get in with the approach in like much in detail. Okay, but just that outline is not enough for you to like crack out anything, any solution that is there. So you need to understand the technicalities, the depth in the approach that you're going to take up. So I would say yes. So that optimization, whatever you asked for, is what it requires much experience in that. Because even a 3 year, 4 year experience person in deep learning, he will still face issue in training a network. He will still face issues in understanding why this model has failed. But that comes with experience. So yeah, experience is very important along with problem solving capability, but not only problem solving capability is what my idea is.
Yeah, when you told all these, right, I just wanted to ask you this one question. What's your view on AI alignment?
Okay,
Alignments have
alignment. So
really given out a huge trend in AI today. It's actually a part of building an AI, AGI system at the end of the day, which is applicable for all fields, let it be NLP, computer vision, deep learning, or else and self-driving autonomous system working on an AGI. All these have come into the picture in AI alignment. What's your view on it?
so alignment meaning the best of what the AI could do, or like.
Yeah, that's it. That's the thing.
Okay. So yeah, as I already said, AI alignment is, as far till now, is, yeah, it's good, but it's not completely reliable. So as I've already given you like some examples where AI would definitely fail. Okay, so even now, if you see, even in the NLP field, like you mentioned, where AI will be able to process the text, but sometimes it wouldn't understand your sarcasm. Correct. So AI can still cannot make out what is the difference between a sarcasm and what he has actually meant in it, right? So now there are like different types of feelings that will be conveyed in a text. So you need to, like, that part of the technology is still lacking. That is what I would say. So that is in the field of NLP. Then even in like computer vision, if you see, like as I said, like in the self-driving technology, due to these attacks, now your AI system should be such robust that whatever edge cases that will be there, so it has to solve that. But such kind of an building an AI system is like close to impossible actually, if you say, because now say your AI systems are actually broadly classified into two types. One is narrow AI and the other one is broad AI. Okay. So what is broad AI? Your one particular AI system can perform multiple tasks. Okay, multiple things it can understand. Like if I take an AI system, it will be able to understand your sarcasm. It will be able to process your NLP. It will also be able to like process your the computer vision, the images part. Okay, so images, texts, different types of what do you say? Different formats of data. Okay, different types of applications. But not many AI systems have come like that. Like in fact, there's no AI system which can solve everything, like which can solve many different types of applications on its own. So we always go towards this narrow AI system. So where this narrow AI system, what it does is like for a particular type of application, a particular type of AI system will be built. So that way, if you see, we are still in the advent of narrow AI systems that is being developed. So yeah, like I would say AI alignment still needs to be improved and it still has to see some improvements in the years to come.
Yeah, no, when we think of data which is in big data, it can be zettabytes of data which is involved today, or else it can be probably terabytes of data which is collected every half an hour in a self-driving car. That's the amount of data which is being collected today. I feel that data has to move more towards sparse, but the machines are more moving more towards the sparse, because there is sparsity involved in data and there is sparsity involved in the model at the end of the day. Now machines are more moving more towards the sparse. What do you feel about machines moving more towards the sparse? Is it just going to be that new disruption which architecture had never seen, or else what is it all about?
Okay, so it actually depends on how it is going to process, because now sometimes now if there's some input to the machine which it hasn't like processed till now. Okay, so if there's some different kind of input itself altogether, now say if there's an outlier in the data input that you're going to the machine, that you're giving to the machine. So what happens? Your machine would obviously it will get disturbed, so it wouldn't understand what outlier actually it is, why it is an outlier. We would be able to know like what outlier it is, but the machine will take a time to understand why it is an outlier. Okay, so that point of the time, at that point of time, your because of those disruptions in the input, your machines will also get disrupted. So that is not the output that we actually want. So as you said, data is what really matters, because disruptions in data will obviously lead you to disruptions in your machine, right? So that is how it has been built till now. It's completely dependent on the data. Now, if data sparsity means that the machines are if there's in such cases where data sparsity is there, the machines wouldn't be able to cope up with actually what is required. Correct? So that sparsity has to do with the data. So machines are like whatever data you give, whatever you teach it will be able to process. But that sparsity has got to do with your data. Whatever you feed it to the machine, whatever you have trained your machine on, whatever the machine is capable of, that is what it will do, right? So that sparsity, whichever you said, has to got it has something to do with the data, and machines are just going on like whatever the input has been given, it processes it well, right? So with the advent of speed, whatever it has, everything it will be able to process it. But that, as I already said, that sparsity is actually with the data. So if you give something which is not in the format that has been acceptable to the machine, so then your machine obviously will misbehave, right? So it will not give you the output that is actually needed. So then you will have disruptions and there will be failures in the system, right? And even a small disruption in the data would lead you to a very big accident also. Okay, so that is how self-driving technology is. That is how crucial your data is. That is how crucial your robustness of your model is, right? So that machine robustness still has to be improved, and that can be improved only if you have robustness in your data, your structured data, unstructured data. different types of data are there. Now processing the data itself needs so much of memory, so much of computation. So that is how, for that particular this processing and all this stuff, for that particular, if you need so much of memory, there people are trying to develop hardware that will be able to process such data, right? So that is how you can keep on overcoming the edge cases that is there. Now whatever data sparsity you said, that is one of the edge cases that we are trying to solve, that still needs to be solved. So yes, that robustness is what is still lacking, and people are doing research to overcome and to get it as robust as possible, but I'm not sure up to what level they can do it. But yes, robustness is one very important thing, that is what we need, and that is where industries are moving forward with their research.
Yeah, when you also told about having such robust architecture, because it's a need at the end of the day. But now, because machine learning just came into the picture, because we were very happy with our Intel i3 second gen, third gen, which used to give an optimal performance for our GTA 5. Not GTA
Yeah.
5, GTA Vice City, that we used to play, with 512 MBs of RAM. It was like, okay, we are just
Yes.
doing something else. But today, when I see machine learning actually influencing systems to build something which is more humongous these days, I feel there is a lot of influence that machine learning has more towards architecture. Even machine learning, searching algorithms, sorting algorithms, all these algorithms are still used in OS at the end of the day. I just want to take your view on what's that influence of machine learning on the compute and the benchmarks of hardware today.
Okay. Very good question. So now say like you have different companies which produce GPU units, right? So now I'll make this point clear first. So whenever you train a machine learning or a deep learning network or model, okay, so it needs a lot of computation. There is a lot of intensive mathematical calculations that is going behind. Correct. So just a CPU cannot handle such intensive calculations, intensive computations. So that is why GPUs come into picture. Okay. Concerned with regards to your training your models. Okay. So now say that there are different companies that produce GPUs. Correct. Now let's compare NVIDIA and AMD. Now, NVIDIA GPUs are more popular than AMD GPUs. Why is it so? Because AMD GPUs can be used for gaming, but NVIDIA GPUs only for gaming. Okay, AMD GPUs can be used only for gaming because they don't have something called CUDA cores. Okay, I'll come to it within a short time. So I'll get back to that CUDA part. So now, if you look into NVIDIA, they have their GPUs are capable for gaming as well as training deep learning models and machine learning. That is why NVIDIA is the leading graphics card manufacturer in the industry, right? So their GPUs can be used for gaming as well as machine learning. Now, how is it used for machine learning is we have something called CUDA cores. In GPU, we have something called CUDA, Compute Unified Device Architecture. Okay, so what it does is it tries to make use of much GPU that is needed for this mathematical calculation that goes behind the gradient-based backpropagation of training any neural network. Correct? This part, this CUDA core part is missing in AMD. So that is why AMD GPUs are not so popular, and they are popular for gaming, but not so popular in the machine learning side. Okay, but NVIDIA GPUs are most commonly used in most of the places. Why? Because they have this CUDA cores optimized for this machine learning training. Okay, so that is where your machine learning sets a benchmark to your computer architecture. Now, slowly, companies should think of developing this CUDA part in their GPUs. Now, that is when they will be able to. Now this is an age of AI, correct? Now, AI is being developing a lot. Machine learning projects have been coming along. Even a small startup has something or the other with that has to do with machine learning or AI. Okay, so they need GPU systems for training and all those stuff. Okay, so for that, companies needs to look into this part. So that is one of the benchmark. Now it's just not the offline systems that we are going to train the model. Now we have we have cloud computing, correct? We can just put our model to a cloud, just train it there on cloud, and you can deploy on cloud also, right? So what is cloud? It is just a system. It's just like a system that is being placed virtually. correct? So from there, you will be able to upload data, you'll be able to train models over there, and you will be able to like deploy it there itself. Example is your Amazon AWS. So what they do, they provide you servers. What are servers? They nothing but the computer systems which have the capability. You can just upload your machine learning model to your AWS instance, and you can just train it there, right? So you'll be able to deploy machine learning models in AWS, Amazon SageMaker. Okay, so these are the benchmarks. When people were working on offline systems, okay, which were hard related to whatever was there in the local systems, now it has gone online. Now people are using online systems to train their models. So now you could see this, right? There's an improvement. There's a large gap that is being bridged between the one which was there before and what is there now, right? So simply the people can just, if you don't have available GPUs online, you can just rent a server, train the model, and deploy it over there, or you can just deploy it on edge devices also. So that is how the advent, that is how the computer has been improved. That is how the architecture for the AI systems has been improved, because basically now why do these we use these CPUs are, one is for machine learning trainings, and then for gamings and all this stuff. Okay, so now this training, now just think, cloud computing, with the advent of cloud computing, there's a very big change in the industry. There's a very big breakthrough in the industry, right? So that is what we actually need. So that is how it is actually happening. Now look at that. You can just like that, you can upload your model and you can like get the outputs over there. Okay, you will be able to synchronize whatever data you have in the local system to the cloud. Correct. So now look at the benchmark. People who are using GPUs initially, people who are using, you can actually train a small neural network developed only with the NumPy software, NumPy package on CPU. Correct. That is one thing. Now, if you have a very big architecture, now you have some like 50 million, 100 million, hundreds and millions of parameters. So that time what will happen? Even sometimes what will happen? Your CPU will be unable to load the model into its RAM. Even your GPU will have some problems. Maybe it will it will able to be like train the model, but it will be little slow. Okay, so we can't provide higher batch sizes for that, right? So now what happened? Now with cloud computing, people are integrating many CPUs. Like they have so many cores, correct? So many cores are now single. Initially, we used to use just single CPU, but now we have octa-core, hexa-cores, 16 cores. Okay, so many cores integrated together, parallel processing, GPU parallel computing, all this stuff. So these things, multi-threading, multi-processing, okay, data parallelism, model parallelism. So these things, exactly, I would like to add few points regarding this data parallelism and model parallelism. So now this discussion is actually going on regarding how has the benchmarks changed with respect to model AI system with the advent of machine learning, right? So now say I have a very big network which it can't fit into one single GPU also. Okay, GPU will have higher capacity to train a model. But now let's say, since deep learning is seeing a very big boom, since researchers are going in deep learning, there are very like big models that have been invented in deep learning. Now let's say there is one such model which is like which a single GPU is unable to load in it. What we can do is we can have multiple GPUs synchronized. You can just divide, now say if that particular model has 20 layers. You can just divide that layers to different GPUs, make the training, so it will be able to synchronize the layer weights that has been updated on different GPUs on different layers, and then it will be able to give you a combined output. Now look at the difference. A single GPU was unable to load that model itself, but because of multiple GPUs, you're able to train that model. Correct? So that is how AI is setting a benchmark in the computer hardware. Multiple GPUs, multiple CPUs synchronized together. So with the increase in the layers that deep learning is going through, there is an improvement in the hardware, and that is an example. Now, as I already said, Amazon instances, you have P3, P2, P3, P4 instances. P4 instances are so fast. They have like different GPUs connected together, which will be able to like do both data parallelism, always model parallelism. So that will like speed up your process, your training process. Correct? So look at the bridge that has like come from here to here. So I would obviously say that AI is actually setting a benchmark for the computer architecture, the hardware architecture.
Yeah, when you told about it, yes, there is law. There is a loyalty that we are showing for our EC degree. That's for sure. Because we studied for
Yes.
4 years and we thought we never will use it, but now somehow we are just using it back once again. You know,
Yes.
I've been working on genomics for quite a while now, and also on proteinomics as a problem statement, not as a researcher, but as a hobbyist. I've just been working there for quite a
Okay.
while now. When I see
Okay.
papers from Nature, ICLR, which focuses on medical image or the biomedical image processing or anything, you know, there is an involvement in AI, and there are some false proofs which machines have actually given out, but people are still relying on AI. What's that actual thing which is going behind AI? Will just AI give solution to all the problem statements that they are facing today? In, let it be genomics, proteinomics, or what is that trend which has really brought AI to this workflow of the community? And what can be your thoughts to those people who are really relying on AI to just solve the problem today?
Okay. So now relying on AI is okay. But as I already said, we shouldn't completely rely on AI. Now say now whatever this fields, this genomics, proteomics, whatever is said, actually I am very weak in biology, please bear with me. But whatever knowledge I have, I'll just, whatever I knew in this, I'll just tell you. So now this genomics, proteomics, whatever you said, okay, just in general, if you take in the medicine field, okay, AI can be relied, but not completely, right? A 98% accurate AI can give you, now if you give 1,000 samples of data to it, a 98 or 99% accurate AI will give you 990 perfect samples. Okay, so remaining 10 samples would be wrong. It will be misbehaved. It will be misclassified. Correct. Now, why this AI is being, why most of the people are going behind AI is it eases their work. It automates most of their work. Now, say if the AI is detecting lung cancer with 99% accuracy, that means that person who is supposed to analyze that 99% of his work is being automated by the AI already. 99% of that person's work has already been taken care by the AI. That just the remaining 1% he has to supervise it, right? So that is what the AI just eases the person's work. That is why AI came into picture. AI got a boom in the current generation. Why? Because now the current generation is moving towards automation, right? So wherever you find automation, you will find at least some part of AI in that. Why? Because in that automation, some most part of the human's work is being eased already by the AI. Now, as I already said, now say you're going to this one classify this brain tumor or whatever I said, this lung cancer or brain tumor, whatever. Okay. Now, as I already said, 99 samples already your model has taken care of. Correct? Your model has already given you the like proper output for 99 samples. That remaining one sample where the output is there, you just need to cross verify why it has happened. That's all. So that means 90% of the headache is done. Correct? AI eased your work, right? So people go behind AI not because it can completely solve everything, but it can at least ease your work, but it can at least remove 90% of your tensions, right? Remaining we will be able to supervision because we'll be able to supervise because without human intervention, the final product cannot be given to whoever like the customers without the human intervention in it. Human supervision level has to be there. Okay, but up to some level, his tensions are avoided, right? Because they are using AI, right? Because automation comes into picture over there. So that is why people run behind AI in many enterprises. AI not just in medicine field, they use now AI, as I already said, it will ease your tensions. It will like take care of almost 80%, 90% of your work. So remaining 10% you need to supervise. So it's not just like medicine field. Now in medicine field, at least people need to be very careful because now say like if you're like doing some, now say if you're predicting whether a particular sample from a particular woman, okay, whether that sample please bear with me, just a general idea. Okay, if that sample is uh, the model is going to predict whether that woman is pregnant or not. Okay, whether that woman is carrying or not. Okay, now you have something called false positives and false negatives, right? Now, what is false positive? You're predicting something which is actually not there as it is there. Okay, so that is false positive, something which is not there, but you're predicting that it is there. Example is your pregnancy. Now that particular woman would not be having pregnancy, right? But if you use AI, if it gives false positives, it will say that that model, that particular woman is pregnant, right? That is not, that is bad, right? Now take care of, now see this false negatives. Now if, what is false negative? Something which is there but it is saying it is not there. Okay, it's predicting that a pregnant woman as not pregnant, correct? So these are very very critical, at least in the medicinal field. So that is why, but now these false positives, false negatives, as much as they are reduced, that much your AI robustness will increase, correct? So at least up to that point where it is robust, till there you can rely on it, but after that you need that supervision. So but at least till that point your tensions are relieved, right? So your work is almost halved. Okay, it's almost like 80% done by the AI itself, correct? Remaining 20% you need to take care. That's all, simple. So it's just of easing the humans work and tensions. So that is why people run behind automation, not just in medical field. People use AI in financial sections, business sections, like as I already said, stock market prediction. Instead of, if you have a proper AI system which can predict what the stock market could be today or tomorrow, okay, you can just blindly like rely on it, right? Up to some level, you can just rely on it, correct? Instead of you taking all the attention, instead of you analyzing all the company's data, see whether that company will give you a profit or loss in that particular end of that particular time. Okay, so whether if it has some debts, whether it will be able to clear it or not, all these things, instead of you analyzing it, if the AI does it, you can just invest in it. You can just invest, start investing. That's the next step. So that is why people want to move to the next step a little faster. By that, like if you analyze, you will take some time, but if the computer analyzes, it will do much faster, right? So that is why to achieve that speed, to achieve that automation, to achieve that fastness, to go to the next step, people use automation and AI in most of their fields.
You know, when you told about all these, right, I really felt very genuinely put in the passion inside the work, bro. Amazing it is. Thank you so much. And also, like, I'll just continue, not the end. Sorry for it.
Okay, okay. Sure, sure, sure.
No, okay, let me just ask this next question where, it's the trend of big data now, but like how to deal with the data today? Because I know, because I have a humble system which has probably an SSD, NVMe, and a normal SATA drive and everything. But like, how to
Okay.
deal with data today? Because it's a huge and a humongous data that it takes in order to build one accurate model. Forget 10 models being built from one neural network architecture. What is that all about? How to deal with the data today?
Okay. So if you see data, since I think like let's say every minute or every second, like how you said, there is terabytes and zettabytes of data being generated. Okay, but not all the data will be structured. Correct? Not all the data will be structured. There will be lots and lots of raw data, unstructured data. Okay, unstructured data meaning something which will be like little. It will have some. You need to do some cleansing in that. You need to remove outliers. Like I'm like talking at the like machine learning point of view. Okay, so you have raw data, so you will have so many outliers in there. You will have something which doesn't even add any meaning to that particular statement or something like that. Now take NLP. Okay, now say for in NLP, if you say for example the words like and, is, or, so these are all actually data, the unstructured data, but some random data which does not add any meaning to the statement, correct? So you need to remove all those data. So that is data cleansing part. So then there are something called outliers, which doesn't belong to that particular category of data, but still it is there. Okay, so those are outliers. So because of that, your machine wouldn't be able to understand what the data is actually. So you will be like able to just remove. You need to like remove the outliers of the data. Okay, so as you can see here that data is very very important, at least in the machine learning point of view. Data is very very important to be provided to the model in a structured format. Okay, if you don't follow that structure, if you have noise in the data, obviously your machine will learn noise, and what output it will give? Noisy output. Correct? If you don't want the model to give noisy output, you train it with better output. That is what the like basic theme which goes behind any like training or any AI system, whatever. So that is what actually here is where data robustness comes into picture. You need to have different types of data, different cases of data, but in a structured way. Okay, so only then you will be able to handle it correctly. Now, as you said, there are like zettabytes and terabytes of data being generated, but they are not structured. Okay, so they are unstructured. Okay, so you need that kind of a hardware which will be able to process it. So as I already said, so now there'll be even cases where one single CPU, okay, one single CPU even with some 8 GB or 16 GB RAM will not be able to load one single image. Okay, so let's say if you are collecting some like a lot of data from the camera sensor, okay, one single image, there will be cases. I have faced lot of cases where the GPU or the CPU mainly is unable to process one single image. So that is where people go for something called data parallelism or model parallelism, which I already said. Okay, so that is where these things come into picture. So hardware also has to be complying with the complications of the data whatever we have in the current world. So yes, I would say data is like structuring of the data is very important, because now say even in your big data analytics, whatever you said, okay, so we can use some softwares, we can use some tools, okay, and just we can just analyze the data and give some insights to any business enterprise and whatever. Okay, but for analyzing the data, you need to like tabulate the data first. You need to store it in a proper format. You need to process it in a proper like way, in a structured way using some tools. Okay, so there are different tools for processing the data, storing the data. So there has to be a step-by-step process to handle this data. If you directly gonna just take the data and if you want to like make some applications with it, it is not going to possible. There has to be a lot of layers going behind. There has to be different steps that has to be taken care, a step-by-step procedure to handle the data. So yes, because since we have a lot of data, we need to have the hardware complying to that, and also we need to make sure that the data is being processed properly so that we get the expected output whatever we want. Like yeah.
Yeah, when you told about hardware, it was fine, software, it was fine. But when it comes to neural network architecture, right? We have
Right.
not built such a robust architecture where it can really derive the insights of what this data set is also all about. When you just, when we see researchers, right? If you don't get the solution from any means, like you apply probability, you apply SVM, you don't get any means, don't worry, convert the data into a spectrogram, take the image, feed it inside a CNN, you will get some or
You
the other thing
yeah.
as a solution at the end of the day. Even in self-driving car, it's the same thing, because if you don't get any insights, convert it into a spectrogram, just feed it in a CNN, you'll just get the insight of the data. But like
Yeah.
actual insights, we have really not got that. Do you really think so that one day we'll have a neural network architecture which can really give that insight to us?
Okay. So based on that, so what I could say is, now if you want to do that, so there will be a neural network which is like designed for some particular application. Okay. But if you want to do that, there has to be a separate neural network which will work only on the data just to extract the patterns and compare it with the original patterns that we want, that we actually supposed to that we actually have. Okay, so because the underlying patterns in the data, now neural networks, why neural networks, deep learning are famous, because they are able to understand the underlying pattern which is there behind the data. Okay, so underlying patterns, whatever is there, there will be a common pattern that is being like fed in the data, correct? Now, if I continuously feed the neural network with the images of car, so it will be able to understand, okay, why this is a car, correct? So it will be able to understand the underlying pattern, the underlying feature, why it is a car. So that is where neural network stands out compared to other algorithms. Okay, so now if I say that if I give data of bike continuously, I will give some thousands of images of bike, and I say it is a car. So what will the neural network do? It will learn that bike as car. So it will predict that bike as car, right? So it depends on what data is being given to the model. For neural networks, at least, data pre-processing is very important. So as of now, there is no neural network that can like compare the underlying pattern with what actually the object is. Okay, so that part, we that if we need that comparison, then we need again another neural network. So which will be able to give out the features. Then you need to do feature mapping between this one and that one. Okay, so these things are like some overhead, right? Instead of doing that, we anyways know what we're supposed to get. Just pre-process that and give it to the neural network. Why to waste computation with some extra neural network, which will be able to like get the insights, right? Already this particular neural network, if you give it in a proper, if you give it the proper data, it will be able to give you the insights about what data it is, and it will be able to give you the correct output. Now, if you want to say, if you want to like have a neural network which can detect outlier in the data, so that is something like okay, that is possible, but I would feel it is unnecessary because like why do you want to do it? Like when you know when you process the data and you give it to it, so you just have one single neural network for that particular application. Now, if you have another network which will just depend only on data, which will process only on data, just to see whether it's an outlier, whether it's a noisy data or not. So that is just like an overhead. Like it will simply improve your increase your computation, right? So instead of doing that, it's better we at least some human part should be there, right? So I think it's better we do the pre-processing thing so that the model learns it better. So
Yeah,
we just to avoid that overhead of the computation. That's it, extra computation.
yeah, overhead of computation is fine, but we are actually fearing to apply the algorithms these days. We are adamant to the potential of what an algorithm could be. If it's in a form of a paper, we see the math and we see it's complex. But now, when you start coding it using TensorFlow, there's a huge way difference because everything has been simplified. Something as a tensor optimization, it's been simplified at the end of the day. What's your
Yes.
view on, are we really adamant to the potential of the algorithm? Are we just fearing to apply it in this field? Also, what is that which is actually hindering us in order to apply an algorithm? What's that fear that's actually doing it to us?
Okay. So I could say it's like kind of a trade-off. Okay. So why? Because sometimes people design algorithms based on whatever hardware they have. Now say like okay. Now like take the researches that is being done by some personal researchers. Okay. Not at the commercial level. Okay. Not at the business level. Okay. Just say that like we do some like personal researches. Okay. Now, when I used to do my research and when I used to do some like training for my project and all, I used to use Colab. Okay, although I have better architectures than Colab, I am limited to Colab, right? Because that time I may not be able to comply with that particular hardware. So I need to make sure that whatever that happens in Colab, like many times if the data is too hard, if the processing is too much, your Colab will crash, right? I have seen such cases also. Okay, so it's like you have to comply. So sometimes in the at least in the personal level, sometimes you will have to comply with the hardware that is available to you. Okay, the infrastructure that is available to you. Okay, sometimes we can develop algorithm to the potential of the hardware, right? Sometimes now that is how now the other cases hardware being developed to the potential of the algorithm. Now that the best example for that is the neural network. So as I said before, since the deep learning neural networks got deeper with the like with the increasing number of layers, the networks got deeper with time, and because of that now like the hardware computations, the different types of that processing, that multi-processing, multi-threading, all these things have been introduced, correct? So all these things have been used now and applied now. Okay, why? Because that is complying with what we want, correct? So that is the other case. Now there are some cases like I said, like where we have to comply to the potential of the hardware. Okay, so I would say like it's a trade-off between these two things. Like sometimes we develop algorithm to the potential of the hardware, and sometimes there is an improvement in the hardware in the commercial level when it comes to the potential of the algorithm. So I would say it's a 50-50 trade-off.
But what about the recorder system which is being used in the self-driving car, or else any system which is doing the back end of the decision making? There is a huge and a humongous plausibility that there can be a flaw in those systems at the end of the day, because all these systems are having some sort of a threshold. It can be in the amount of use, in the amount of processing, all these. But what's your view on these systems which make flaw at the end of the day?
Okay. So now see, now these recorder systems, whatever we use now, okay. So leave camera. I'll come to camera a bit later. Now say let's get into lidar. Now what lidar does, for a single spin, it throws out multiple laser beams, okay, and it gathers almost thousands and thousands of points, okay, lidar points. Now that will be stored in a bin file, okay. So now if you try to process that, it will need lot of computation, okay, lot of computation. The error that is being given by the lidar is very minimal, right? Now lidar is a recorder system, okay. Since it works on light particles, since it works on this laser beam, okay. So whether, now say if you have a camera and a lidar, whether your if your even if your camera fails, your lidar wouldn't fail, correct? Since it works on this light particles are always there surrounded, okay. So even if your camera fails at some point, your lidar wouldn't fail, right? But the error that is being given to the points, now say if the lidar has detected some object and it has given some points with respect to that particular object, okay, now it has say some lakhs of, it has given some lakhs of points for that particular for the particular object. Maybe 1 or 2 points might be different, 1 or 2 points might be erroneous in those overall data that is being given, but those are negligible, right? So that is how the optimization is there in LiDAR. Now, when it comes to camera, there are chances that suddenly your IR filter will go off, your Blu-ray filter, your blue light filter will go off. Okay. Now, because of that, what happens? Your camera will not be able to absorb the IR rays, and your data will be like fully scattered. Sometimes it will be like fully blurred at the side edges. Sometimes it will be like sometimes the data will be like some in some different color itself, okay, like some pinkish color or something like that, because there would be because of some small failures in the filter, like IR filter, whatever I said, okay. So these things do happen, but even if a proper camera which is recorded, the hardware level synchronization, the hardware level error will be very less, and that is negligible, okay. But errors will be there, not saying errors will not be there, errors will be there, but they are very negligible, very minimal. So we actually need not consider such errors. So we'll be still able to like process the different sensor data that we are getting, right? So if you have a stack of sensors, you have a stack of if you have stack of sensors, you'll make sure that, okay, even if one sensor fails, the other sensor will get you the data, correct? So you have to be prepared for such cases. But yes, errors will be there, but very minimal errors. Yeah. So recorder systems, as you said, any sensor, any recorder system, it will have errors, but very minimal, negligible type of errors, negligible level of errors. They can easily detect it, not an issue.
I know math has been something as an important, and there are theories like Amdahl's law. I'll just state it. That is, the
Okay.
performance improvement to be gained by using some faster mode of execution is limited by the fraction of time the faster mode can be used. Will this work in the world in order to get an AI to think wise as a man or as a human at least? I really wanted to get your insights on whether just by having good benchmarks and good set of rules, which is being defined by trained model or something, or else in terms of performance, is it just good enough to build a system which can behave as good as a human?
Say no, because it takes a lot of time for the AI to behave like a human. But I'm not saying it is not possible. Like, it is possible, but it takes lot and lots of, like, it takes at least like some hundreds and hundreds of years to for the AI to get to that level, because that law which you stated. So now faster mode of execution is basically with respect to time, right? So now, how much ever fast it is, you can't, like, with the increase in the speed, like whatever speed limit that you have, okay, so whatever increase that you have got in that mode of execution, so based on that, you'll be able to get a little bit performance improvement in the AI system. But that doesn't mean you can just make it like work like a human being, because AI system can never think like a human being. As I already said, it will be able to automate things, it will be able to ease the tensions of humans, but it will be it will not come up to that level where it can think like a wise man, or at least like a human being. Okay, but even if you continue your research on this field, you need to do it for hundreds and hundreds of years because industry experts say that at least it will take some 200 to 300 years for the AI or the robots to behave like how humans are behaving. Okay, so it's not so simple. It is not so easy because you can see the computation that is going behind a human brain, correct? And what the like current AI systems are doing. So obviously, just because if you like use some like a little bit faster mode of transaction hardware, so it doesn't mean that so many like now say it doesn't mean that the processing that is happening in your AI system will match up to our brains, human brains, correct? It needs lot of time for that. So at least for now, I would say none of the AI systems can match up to human beings level.
Yeah, when you think of deep learning as one, right? I just want to ask you this one question. What is that key idea that brought the success of deep learning into the community workflow? Because I know, because you have been working for quite a while now, you have worked on algorithms, you have also learned about lot and lot of theoretical applications. I know there is a lot of difference between the theory and the practicals, but I just want to ask your view on what is that one factor that really brought deep learning to a community workflow that is happening today? It's a huge boom at the end of the day, but what brought that success of for getting this deep learning into the state of art technology today?
Simple. It's your availability of data. Now, what happened is, now say if you have your small machine learning algorithms, now with just some hundreds of samples, you'll be able to get optimal output from such algorithms. Okay, but as you said, like when the time kept on moving, we started generating lots and lots of data. Okay, so we needed that power. We needed that power to analyze such data. Okay, just a small algorithm cannot analyze such a big data, right? So as the data kept on increasing, as the data kept on being generated, okay, so we needed some extra improvement. We needed some extraordinary power that will be able to process such data. Okay, so that is when deep learning came into picture because deep learning, the underlying concept of deep learning is mathematics. Okay, the floating point number calculations, the matrix multiplications, the linear algebra, the calculus, these are all the basis of deep learning. Okay, so these map together when the deep learning, when the so much of data was generated. So we needed a computation where we could process such data. Okay, so that is where deep learning came into picture. Because now say with 200 images, if we can achieve some good results. Now think if we have 20,000, 2 lakhs images, how much results we can achieve? Correct. So that is where deep learning. That is why deep learning got famous there. Deep learning got popular because of the availability of data. Now with that, now deep learning was able to process such huge amount of data. It was able to give better results compared to what the conventional algorithms that were there before, and that is why deep learning got popular, right? So now say if you're in your some machine learning algorithm, say like linear regression or logistic regression, whatever. Now they have a predefined function in them. Okay. Now take linear regression. They have a predefined function in them. They will try to fit the data to that particular function. Correct. But deep learning is not like that. It tries to learn the mapping between the input data that you give to the output. Correct. So it will try to understand why this output is being given for this particular input. Why not the other one? Okay, we have different probabilities, right? Now, say if we have a letter A, okay. Now, if you have this, not letter A, okay, let's get into self-driving itself. Now, let's say I have an image of car, okay, and I have 5 classes to classify: car, person, truck, bicycle, motorcycle, something like that. Okay, now if I give that image to the deep learning model, the model will give me a probability of which class that particular object belongs to. Correct. So now if it says that probably this class belongs to car, so how is it saying that? Okay, I never told it that directly. I never like what you say, like this car, actually what I did, I have to give it some thousands of samples for it to understand that this is a car. So I never set the model that okay, if it has this kind of a headlight, it will be a car. If it has a like a glass at the behind, it will be a car. Okay, if it is in this size, if it has some, if the wheels are like this, The headlight is like this. I never said that it is a car, right? I never told the features to the model, but the model has learned it. The model has learned the features that if it is like this, the car will be like this. Okay, if the features are like this is a car. If the features are like this, it is a bike, right? I just processed the data in some format, in a proper format, and I gave it to the model. That's all. The model by itself was able to understand what a car actually means and why this image is being given to a car, right? So that is how deep learning came into picture. That is why deep learning got a big boom. Okay, because of the ability of the deep learning models to map the output to its input, to map the correlation function that defines the input. Now, your final outcome of any deep learning neural net is it will finally approximate y equal to f of x. Okay, let's go into math a bit. Finally, what output you get from deep learning is y equal to f of x. That's all. X is your input, y is your output. But that f, I did not define that f. The model has itself defined that f. The model has itself understood that this is what is f. This is what is the function that I'm supposed to do with the increasing data. So that is where deep learning got its popularity. And that is how people are moving towards deep learning.
Yeah, when I was actually learning about TensorFlow 2.0, I think probably 2019 March, it was still in a beta version. We were part of Technoids by then. We were part of Technoids by then, and Akhilesh was like, okay, it will still be in the beta, and now it's already 2.0, 2.4.0, and I recently did a workshop with it also, and I was like, okay, man, such long time it took for just getting this thing happening. But like, there's a lot of difference between practicality and the reality of working with TensorFlow, right? I think probably Akhilesh was the one person who literally
Yes.
taught us what Keras was all about altogether. I just want to get your view on what's the difference between the theory and the practical application of working with TensorFlow. Because I know you've worked in industry now, and I think probably you can give a lot of insights on how practical application of TensorFlow is different from the theoretical learning what you are actually having in your college today. Yeah, your views on it.
Okay. So theoretically, not just TensorFlow, on a general view, if you see, like there might be some places where the theory would like fail in the practical this one. So I would just give an example. So when I was trying to develop a loss function, okay. So what happened is there was one loss which was supposed to improve the edges. Okay, so there was one loss which I had defined which was supposed to improve the edges. Okay, edges that is present in a particular image. It is supposed to recognize the edges properly in the particular image, enhance the edges present in that image. That is why that loss function was actually defined for. Okay, so I developed that loss function. So theoretically, it was supposed to give me some result, but practically it was not. Okay, when I had implemented that, practically it did not give out that result. I'm not sure whether I made some mistakes or not in that, but I'm speaking like on a general view. If you see, there might be some differences between the theoretical and the practical approach, because I have gone through different GitHub repositories, different research papers, where they say we have made few changes in the implementation as mentioned in the theory, as mentioned in the research paper. Okay, so in research paper they would have mentioned something. Okay, in the practical implementation they would have changed a little bit. Like there will not be much difference in that. They would have implemented the same, but there will be some small change, like some 5%, 10% change will be there in the practical implementation, because maybe the frameworks they had used like did not have the particular functionality which they actually implemented in that research, which they wanted to do in that research. So that such cases do exist, and we need to, in case if that is not complying with the infrastructure that we have, so then we will have to like make some small changes that is finally required to give you the output that is expected. But finally, what matters to us is the result that it is going to give. Until and unless you're getting that result properly, so you don't need to uh, like much care about the changes that you have done. But yes, you have to do some changes compared to what is there in theory and what you are going to do in a practical implementation.
When you told about practical implementation, that is fine, but TensorFlow has been optimized to an extent where it's for hungry learning. It's just hungry for learning. It just takes in the
Yes.
data and it just brings out the features. But now when I look at the laws of AI and the robotics, there is no mismatch between them. They still really make sense to an extent. But I want to ask you this one question. Do you think laws of AI and robotics still make sense to the working scenario of the technology? Let it be from the surgery to learning with the assistant, or else let it be giving an AI companion, just like Replica or some other system which we are actually using these days. Do these laws really make sense in order to get that human interaction with the machines more robust enough in the future? Or else, what is it all about? Elon actually gave this Asilomar principle so that he will be building only secure AI systems. But at the end of the day, it can be used for destruction also at the end of the day. What do you think of all these? Do you really feel so that there is a mismatch in the principles which we are following when it comes to having the laws of AI and the robotics still making sense in the present scenario of human computer interaction?
Okay. So yeah, like they, as you said, it is just an up to a level. Okay, but still there is a mismatch. Now, say for example, now you know these this Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics, right? So what they say, like, there are actually three laws of robotics. So what they say is a robot, the first law. Now a robot which is like it is supposed to obey the human being, okay. But okay, wait. So in the first law, what it says is it is not supposed to cause any harm to the human being, or it should not let something happen which causes harm to the human being. Okay. The second one is it should not it should obey the human being's orders, okay, given to it, unless it is not conflicting with the first one. Okay. Then the third law is it has to protect itself. Okay. Unless it conflicts with the first one or the second one. Now these are the laws. Now let's say that okay, now I have an AI companion. Okay, now I have a robot. Okay, with me. So we are just having a just a normal conversation. I have myself, my friend. Okay, so we both are talking. Now I have an AI companion also with me. Okay, let's think of a robot which can actually do stuff. Okay, so now say if I just in a sarcastic way, if I say that robot that okay, just kill this person, man. Like in between, we keep on talking to people, right? We'll keep making jokes, right? If we are talking to friends, what will do? Like, "Hey, just kill this person. Like, why is he even alive?" Like that will be saying, right? So such kind of sarcastic some things if I say, okay, now say if there's an AI companion with me, if there's a robot with me, if it doesn't understand that if I told it sarcastically, okay, now what these laws actually mean, it is supposed to, it got orders from me. Okay, so it has to obey the second law. That is, it has to obey my order because it has got orders from me. Now it has to kill that other person. Okay, now first law. First law says that it is not supposed to cause any harm to the human being. Correct? So now this first law is conflicting with the second law. Right? So in such examples, like this is still a lot like this I'm talking about like the future, like where the robots are going to understand what they're actually going to do and what orders we're getting, that point of time. Okay, so at that time if such things happen, like do you think the laws actually comply with each other? No, right? Like there are mismatches with the laws. So yes, like I would say these laws has to be a little bit refined, at least for the like working scenario, because that is not going to happen. But still, there has to be some refinement in the laws.
You have seen there is a lot of software layers which has been applied on computer vision models or else anything like deep learning models. Will computer ever take care of all these at the same time, or else is it just an overhead or an overkill that we are just adding it on a machine in order to just serve us the purpose? What is that all about? Lot of layers of hardware and software abstractions which is going on in one given point of time. And what's your view on this? Will they really
Actually,
make a sense on applying this all in one system? Or do we need some sort of a distributed system which is specific for AI? What's it all about?
okay. So, like as you mentioned, these amount of layers that is going behind the software, hardware, these are actually required. So why? Because now say now in a general manner, Now say if I'm entering a command, okay, the computer cannot understand what command I'm entering. If it has to understand, that command has to be transferred into bits of zeros and ones. Okay, so it has to be transferred into zeros and ones, because finally what the computer can understand is zeros and ones. Correct? So if we have a 64-bit memory processor, okay, then two parts, then 64 zeros and ones, the command that I'm entering has to be transformed into a 64 vector length zeros and ones. Okay, so which the computer can understand, right? Now that is where your this software and hardware, whatever is, it comes into picture. Okay, so now the command whatever I'm entering, like after the first layer, it will happen something. After the second layer, like these many layers in the software are there just to convert this command whatever I'm giving into the machine understandable format. Now, just a basic example. Now, see your programming. Okay, so when you write a program, you need a compiler or an interpreter. Okay, with respect to that particular programming language, to convert it to the human level language syntax to the machine level code. Correct? So now you need the compiler. It's not that the compiler is added unnecessarily to it, but you need the compiler for this particular conversion. Right. So that compiler, what it does, it tries to understand the syntax, it tries to manipulate the syntax, what is being written, and it has this debugging and all the stuff. Okay. So at the end, it has to pass out zeros and ones to the computer. Okay. So in between, there will be a lot of layers. Like debugging can be one of the layers. Okay. Now, because like if there is some exception, now it has to make sure that that particular compiler has exception handling also. Correct? So it has to handle the exceptions also that is going to occur, right? Assertions, exceptions, all these things has to be handled. Okay, so it's so that those many layers has to be there. Okay, only then such a complex flow of commands and instructions can be interpreted. So yes, it's not an overhead. Maybe it's not an overkill, obviously. It might be an overhead considering the number of layers. Maybe like if some 4 to 5 layers are doing that particular job, okay, so it can be merged to 2 to 3 layers so that we can like avoid some part of the overhead. But yes, those are actually required for the conversion at least, because ultimately what goes behind is you convert it to zeros and ones. The computer will have so many transistors, the processors will have so many transistors, the chips, the bit lines which are there in the memory will open and close. Correct? If you give it a zero, it will close. If you give it a one, it will open and close. Okay, right? So that is how it is. So for that to happen, you need these many levels of conversions to happen. So yes, that maybe that overhead can be reduced, but it's not an overkill, obviously.
Yeah, last question, your thought in the community space, like you also created one more club which is called as Technoids, which is pretty famous in RNSIT because it's from an EC people who
Fantastic.
actually wanted to work on deep learning hardware. You, Akshay Krishna, and Akhilesh, three of them together co-founded the team
Yes.
called as Technoids, and it's been an inspiration to all the RNSITians out there. Of course, it's a little personal. Of course,
Yes.
I just it's because I'm also part of that team in the RNSIT and I study there. No, it's in something which is more emotionally connected team which we have in the community space at the end of the day. No, I just wanted to ask you this: how has been that teaching in community influenced you for the research all about? If you are a person who is in the research of self-driving autonomy today, what's that one thing that really taught you after teaching in the community? That's what I really ask.
Okay. So, like teaching community, what should I say? Okay, so one thing what I learned from my personal experience when I like was pursuing my academic this one is like you have to be like more, you have to understand the concepts, so you have to be more practical oriented. Okay, so you have to be more practical oriented because there's a reason why they have written those books. There's a reason why they are explaining theory about that. Because such things we need to implement it practically. Only then we'll be able to understand a better. If we want to get a better understanding of it, we need a practical approach to it. We need to practically implement some concept. Now, say if somebody, if a teacher, like if a faculty teaches you some concept, Okay, yes, fine. So if she has taught you about how a logic gate, okay, can like process zeros and ones. Okay, now you have this labs also parallelly, apart from theory classes, you have these laboratories also. So where you go and test out few logic gates, how it is working. So if the AND gate, if I give a 0 and 1 to the AND gate, it is supposed to give me a 0. So how is that flow happening from here to there? So how where can I apply these gates in my project or whatever it is? So this type of analysis is what I actually understood. So how are we going to use this type? How are we going to apply this? Because application is what finally matters, right? So you can learn a logic gate, you can know how well it works, okay, but where are you going to use this, right? That application might be there. That application has to be there. Now you know multiplexers. Multiplexers will do if you give multiple inputs to it, it will select one input based on criterion, correct? So where it can be used in analog multiplexers in different in the power systems, right? So in the power systems, you can use this analog multiplexers. So these are the applications. So these are the applications. You need to be application oriented. Now, if you learn something, where are you going to apply it? How are you going to apply it? So that is what actually means. That is what actually like drives you towards this corporate world that is there in the present age. So yeah, that is what I learned from my personal experience. And yes, I would say yeah.
Thank you so much, brother. It was an amazing podcast doing with you. I think probably I have not skipped question. I've actually added a lot of questions which was not supposed to be in the questionnaire, in the draft questions. But yeah, you answered it so well, and I was so amazed, and I'm so proud that I have been part of the team called as TechnoArts, which was co-founded by you three, and I'm still learning a lot. And thank you so much, brother, for this amazing podcast.
Yes, sure. Like as I just one point I would like to add. So like learning is what, like even at the age of 20, whether at the age of 20 or whether at the age of 50, you still keep learning. So that experience is all about how much you've learned in those many years. Okay, so people, industries look for experience, industries look for skills. So why do they do this? Why they do this is because they're just analyzing how much you have learned in that experience, how much you will be able to carry forward with whatever you have learned in that experience. So that is what that is what matters a lot. Okay, so in the corporate world, when you have to match up to the industry standards, you need to keep on learning, keep on learning. So learning is permanent. Your solutions or the outcomes might be temporary, but your learning is always permanent. You should keep on learning, keep on trying. We still need to learn a lot. So at no point of time you should think that I have learned this, so that is enough. You should keep on learning. There is still so much that we are not explored yet. So there is still myself. Like if you take, I'm still keep on learning about the stuff which I like. I'm really passionate about. So like wherever I find my interest, I keep like learning about it. I do some research about it. So knowledge will help you by the like if you keep on learning, what will happen? Your experience will improve, your knowledge will improve, and that is what industries look for now. Okay, so that is your desire to learn should never end at any point of time of your life. That is what is about your leading your life actually. If you say in any field, you have to learn everything. You have to learn most of the things. You should keep on learning. Only then you'll be able to prosper.
Thank you, bro. Thank you so much for that valuable addition, and thank you so much for this amazing podcast. Any words that you want to say?
Yeah. So that one thing where you should like never stop learning. That is one thing, and the other thing is like try thinking about applications. That when you learn something, try thinking about applications. Try solving a problem. Like when there is a problem, just try solving it. Just decode what is happening in there. So you'll be able to understand what is going behind, and if it matches with whatever you have learned, start applying that. Because when you apply, that is when you will be able to understand it better. So yes, practical approach, practical application is what will drive you in the future towards the
Yeah.
industry level standards.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this amazing podcast. It's been wonderful that talking with you and amazing. Thank you so much, brother.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, man. Thank you. It was wonderful doing this podcast with you.